before you take any action is to listen first. If you show up and, oh, we've decided this is what you should be hearing from us, but we've done no intelligence gathering, then it's going to fall on deaf ears, or you're going to look tone deaf. In this day and age, you don't have to be on 10, but you can no longer just be on one. If you even just take a little bit of time and start paying attention to the kind of conversations that are happening, nobody goes on social media and says, hey, guess what I'm doing today? I'm buying insurance. But they do talk about, oh, I'm getting married this weekend. Oh, we have a new child on the way. Each of these social platforms have nuances about them from a socio-demographic point of view, and you need to know that. You're not using a finfluencer every single day for every piece of content. So there has to be something more foundational in place.
Welcome to the Growth Engine podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Andrew Jenkins from Volterra Digital. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. You've built one of Canada's most respected social media agencies and worked with some of the country's biggest financial institutions. What first pulled you into financial services?
It's not very dramatic. I got a referral to the chief brand officer at the bank, and had a meeting with them, and I had sort of newly minted expertise in social, having been commissioned by Nesta in the UK to do research on all the predominant social networks at the time, a few years previous to my introduction to the bank's CMO, or chief brand officer. And anyway, we just hit it off in the first conversation, and they were trying to build their overall strategy and operating model, and I had some thoughts on that resonated with them. And the chief brand officer brought me in a consulting capacity, and then partnered me with someone who was a 10-year veteran of the bank, who knew how to navigate the bank and what stakeholders needed to be involved in our efforts. And we worked as a tag team, navigating the bank and evangelizing this new strategy.
Tell me about Nesta, because Nesta, am I right? Nesta's the charitable organization.
It's the National Endowment for Science, Technology, and the Arts. And through a connection I made via social media, in this case LinkedIn, made a connection with someone from Nesta, and then was commissioned by them to do research on all the predominant social networks at the time, and this was 2008. And the lens through which I was looking at the research were social networks the new city? And because there was a kind of an initiative happening at Nesta, so I looked at all the predominant social networks from a standpoint of governance, community, culture. So I was on every social platform, exploring them for what they were, even like Second Life and things like that, and put together a 40-page report. And it doesn't seem that long ago, but in 2008, do you remember what the number one social network was?
I would guess Facebook.
Nope, MySpace.
MySpace. Wow. Was it really? Yeah. Was Facebook even around then in 2008?
Facebook was in the top 10, but MySpace was number one.
Wow. Yeah.
And so what a change in the world. So anyway, that project changed my life and changed the business that I run. So.
Amazing. I'm intrigued. I don't want to get us distracted from this point. We'll have to talk about the rest of that another day. Yep. So coming back into the world of financial services, you landed in the bank. And what was when you've started to focus in on financial services? Did anything sort of strike you about how they were currently using social, or were there gaps, or what was your first impressions?
Well, you use one example. So I went to work for the Royal Bank of Canada, or RBC, and they had been. I'm going to use one of their brand pillars, which was Olympics, or the Olympics, and they sponsored Olympians that were under contract as well. And what they were doing was a lot of paid campaigns and activations, but they weren't doing anything organic. So they were running a campaign, going silent, running a campaign, going silent, running a campaign, going silent. This was 2011. They had done a cross Canada torch relay, and they created a Twitter account when it was called Twitter, dedicated to the torch relay. But then when the Olympics were over, they just walked away from that account with, a sizable community that they had built and fostered. And so we rebranded it as RBC Olympic. And I was trying to steer them away from being solely reliant on paid. Is paid necessary? Absolutely. But they weren't building community. They were just doing these sort of flash in the pan. And I'm not trying to cast them as, the single guilty party. This is often done by brands where they just
Yeah.
somewhat complacent and they just rely on paid, because a lot of times feel like I don't see the ROI of community management. They won't put a body or bodies in place and dedicated to engaging a community. And so my argument was paid can continue, but in between those spikes of campaigns, what are you doing to keep the community you've built engaged? And so we started to steer them away from just being solely campaign oriented to being jointly focused on campaign and community.
So that's interesting, and it's interesting that you're using the term community there, because the world in financial services that I'm often involved in is when they're actually trying to go after acquisition. So acquisition of either prospective investors or new clients or
Mhm.
whatever that may be. Um, can social be used as can I'm presuming that the community can be prospective clients, and you're essentially warming people up for purchase. But it sounds as with the word community, it sounds much broader than that as well.
Well, if we broaden it a little bit beyond financial institutions to the investor community, and we did some work in financial services specific to the mining industry. And mining investors pay a tremendous amount of attention to Twitter. And instead of hashtags, they follow cash tags, and that's the stock symbol preceded by the dollar sign. And you'll see chatter on Twitter about particular investments. And then that extends to discussion boards, again, about investments, and that extends to Reddit. And whether you call them a community or not, there's like these pockets of conversations that are happening. And if in financial services companies are like skeptical about social and whether or not there are people there, they don't have to take any action about campaigns or anything. They just have to spend an afternoon and tap in and saying like, is my brand being mentioned? Are there indicators that the kind of conversations that are relevant to us or that our advisors have across the proverbial kitchen table with investors, are those kinds of conversations happening? And so we did work with this publicly traded mining company that specialized in battery metals, but they had new patent pending technology that they wanted to introduce to the marketplace. And so we ran a series of 8 meta campaigns over 6 months, and we targeted the traditional mining investor audience, and we targeted a net new audience that was interested in electric vehicles, clean technology, green technology. And we had different ad sets for each of the audiences. And we found that there was a certain baseline performance that was achieved for the traditional mining investor audience, but the clean tech, green tech, EV investor audience was the best performing. And
Right.
over 6 months, we saw increase in daily trading volume, an increase in discussion volume on discussion boards, a tripling of their stock price, and $200 million being added to their market cap.
Wow. What a case study.
Well, now I can't say that, this ad on Tuesday, March, whatever, meant that John Smith bought 10,000 shares, but the correlation over that 6-month period, those are the things.
Yeah.
And so this goes back to like, what can you measure and how can you measure it and so on. Needless to say, they were happy. But
Yeah.
it, it all began with who is the target audience and where are they congregating and does such an audience exist and where? And we were able to prove those audiences exist. They're having conversations that are relevant, and we were able to tap into them and influence their purchasing.
Amazing. At Hub, we're working with lots of and speaking to lots of clients that are investment trusts, um, or they are asset managers with products and are often going after retail investors in
Hmm.
the UK. I attended a few conferences and social. There are people are sort of dabbling into it, but I don't think that. Well, there are the firms that are really embracing social as a strategy. I think from an investment trust point of view, you could probably count on one hand. And I think that there is a kind of lack of understanding about how you go in and you actually build out a bona fide social media strategy for new clients. So are you able to talk us through what your company does if a new client came on
Hmm.
board? Like, how would you go about mapping out a strategy for them?
Well, we work with financial services in two ways. We work with financial services organizations that work through advisors, or if it's insurance, through producers, as they're sometimes called. So
Yeah.
we're providing, I'll call it, resources, supporting material. We're kind of educating the channel so that the channel can educate the end retail client. Then
Yeah.
there is working with the organizations to, I do a lot of personal brand and LinkedIn training for salespeople in financial services or in
Okay.
insurance. So I show them how to elevate their personal brand, how to prospect, and how to get more referrals. And also just across the board, whether it's organization or the individual advisor or a salesperson, how to use content to influence. But there's something fundamental too, is that whether it's the individual or the organization, before you take any action is to listen first. And so we had an engagement related to an insurance company that sold life insurance and dental insurance. Nobody goes on social media and says, I can't, hey, guess what I'm doing today? I'm buying insurance. Like, just that doesn't that doesn't happen. But they do
Yeah. You're
talk
not going to
about
get your lead that way.
no, but they do talk about, "Oh, I'm getting married this weekend. Oh, we have a new child on the way." And all these life events that are triggers for a conversation that has financial implications. And not to get into the weeds, but we do a lot of social media listening, but just on that one line of thinking around we're having a baby, think about all the different ways that people describe having a baby. We're expecting, the family's growing. Somebody puts up a picture of the stickers that go back on the back of the minivan, like of the number of kids that they have and that kind of thing. These are all signals, again, that there's an opportunity to have a conversation. And the shrewd financial services organizations and people are paying attention to those signals and finding an opportunity to engage. In the
Mm.
US, when someone changes jobs and LinkedIn tells you they changed jobs, that means their 401k moves from one employer to the next. And they call that money in motion. And that's a trigger to have a
Right.
conversation. Now, I
Mm.
sold cars to pay my way through university. And if I had LinkedIn then to know, oh, my customer who bought a car 3 years ago has been promoted from director to VP. Hello, would you like to be rolled out of that lease and, upgrade to the the better again, these are all digital breadcrumbs that people are leaving
Yeah.
actively or, inadvertently, that I can leverage to spark or engage in a conversation.
Part of the strategy, any solid strategy for any company, is to first understand what are the social signals that they ought to be listening to, and then setting up the mechanics to do the listening for them, or work with an agency such as
Mhm.
yourselves about in order for the is that correct? That's the first part.
It's the same sort of thing. You have to do this, I'll call it reconnaissance, to
Yeah.
know, because if you show up and, oh, we've decided this is what you should be hearing from us, and but we've done no intelligence gathering, then it's going to fall on deaf ears, or you're going to look tone deaf. And
Yeah.
so if you even just take a little bit of time and start paying attention to the kind of conversations that are happening, and also recognize, okay, Facebook is skewing 40 plus years of age. These are people that are more likely to be homeowners given their age band. They're more likely to be parents, skew perhaps a little more female. Um, X, formerly Twitter, skews a little more, well, it used to skew more, I'll call it left leaning, a little more male. And so each of these social platforms have nuances about them from a socio-demographic point of view. And you need to know that. And so are you going to go on
Yeah.
Snap? Well, okay, if I'm a bank, there's certain things that happen on Snap that feel sort of foreign to a financial advisor.
Mm.
And so you have to look at
Yeah.
each platform's strengths, weaknesses, and so on. Instagram, high organic engagement, terrible for referral traffic
Right.
because
Right.
it's the link in bio friction.
Yeah.
So you have to go in, with eyes wide open, have your expectations properly set, and you don't have to have 100% unique content for every platform. You could have a baseline sort of overarching theme, but there's going to have to be slight changes for each platform because of the nature of the platform and the people that congregate there.
Do brands tend to try and choose their best couple of platforms and go after three at once, or would they tend to focus on, right, our core persona that we're going after sits on this one platform, or does it vary for different brands?
In this day and age, you don't have to be on 10, but you can no longer just be on one.
Okay.
And so it's
Yeah.
figuring out what combination gives us the optimal reach. And it's not just reach for reach sake, because, for instance, Facebook has the largest global reach. But if you're starting a Facebook page today and you don't have paid budget to get it off the ground, it is going to be near impossible to build a Facebook page organically.
You're right. Got it.
And in the case of LinkedIn, a LinkedIn company page only reaches about 2% of its followers with content. And should you have a LinkedIn company page? Absolutely. It's free. Are there some advantages to upgrading it to a premium page? Yes, may be worth considering. Should you be mobilizing employees and key client-facing or more media-facing people from within the organization? Absolutely. Should your executive or a subset of them be a little more social? Absolutely. But that speaks to culture, change, and a variety of things. But so again, with every platform, there's, I call it a subset of strategies that have to be considered. But if you want, maximum coverage, choose the platforms where your audiences are congregating, and then define the strategy on a platform by platform basis.
The balance between the paid and and organic, how does that play out?
Well, we use the Facebook or Meta example. If you're building a Facebook page today, you're going to need paid to get it off the ground. But if you only do paid, and so you're just constantly sort
You're
of
going to
in
build no
someone's
community.
face, and well, why are you doing it? Is it just to promote the brand, or is it that you're trying to build a community that you can then organically serve content to after the fact? But if you're
Okay.
not back, so okay, I invited everyone to the party, but the party is the most boring party, or actually there is no party.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Then you haven't built a community, that you were just a flash in the pan, or this, you had their attention for a moment. Even in B2C, if you're using paid and you can't back it up with, I call it, for retailers. So you invited them to the store, you got them to the front door of the store. They came in, they looked around, not their vibe, and they left. But what are you doing to keep them once you've attracted them? And so you need to have it backed up with resources. If I'm a bank, is there like an investment calculator? Is there a mortgage calculator? Are there tools and resources through which I can deliver value to this end audience after I've
Yeah.
used paid to get their attention?
Again, I'm thinking of how you fire these up, and I know that when I speak to clients, I know that the number one concern is all with social has always been like, okay, well, we work in a world of content where we have compliance departments. Um, we create articles, videos, animations for our clients, and we sometimes have to go through 2, 3 rounds of compliance. Now,
Mhm.
world of social is much more reactive, immediate. How, in your experience, how do people start building communities for organic growth
Mhm.
whilst navigating the requirements of internal compliance departments?
Well, one of the first places that you're either, building or maintaining a community is around customer service. And so there's, defining what I call the community rules of engagement. So I'll just use a Facebook page or an ex formerly Twitter channel. If people are reaching out to you with a concern, like, oh, I'm having trouble logging in, or my app is freezing, or like whatever, but they're using social to come to you. And they've chosen that channel to communicate with you. So the onus is on you to respond in the channel that they've elected to, because you're established there. But if that communications is occurring there, your customers need to know what you will and will not allow: profanity, hate speech, getting anger dealt with, and so on. But there's a benefit potentially to using social as a customer service channel, because there is transparency, there's visibility to other customers of how you treat customers. And so, a great example, I just love this example from an executive from the Four Seasons hotel chain, who said, when you have an irate customer in the lobby of your hotel, your first priority is to get them out of the lobby. So if you can move them offline, or to move them to the
Mm,
phone to expedite a resolution to their issue, they often will come back to social to praise you for solving their problem.
right.
And so
Yeah.
now the rest of your customer base or prospective customers see that you've resolved that problem. And so there's some compounding effect to that. The other thing under that umbrella of compliance is, we'll often work with a financial services client to say, what are some frequently asked questions? And because we want to be responsive and quickly, what are some frequently asked questions? And let's get some pre approved responses. And then, so, maybe there's a dozen canned or pre-approved answers, and there's an
Yeah.
escalation path. So that anything that's inbound from social can be triaged to identify, is this an issue? Does it warrant escalation? And you sort of go through this kind of decision tree on how to deal with it.
Mm,
And we were working with a financial services client that had a online trading app. Well, they were doing paid campaigns over the every weekend. And but because they were increasing their visibility, you would come in on a Monday morning and open up the social channels and the comments, and there was a lot of hate. Not so
right.
much of the brand, but this was during the GameStop and the pump and dump, and so they were being
Yeah.
painted with a broad brush by critics of just trading apps, and like calling them all
Yeah.
predators. And I mean, it couldn't have been
Scary stuff
further.
for a brand.
Yes, but also, here's an often overlooked thing: there are human beings that are having to sift through all that stuff,
Yeah.
and so sometimes people forget. Like they're forgetful that there are people that are having to face that onslaught every Monday morning, and so they
Yeah.
know. Oh, come Monday morning, I have to go through, and the first hour of my day is going to be knee deep in garbage.
Yeah.
And so I'm not faulting a financial services brand, but sometimes that is the nature of social. And so
Yeah.
goes back to why you want to have rules of engagement for your community about what will be tolerated and what won't. And also, what
Yes.
is your
Yeah.
policy for deleting a comment, blocking a comment? Because sometimes that incents them even further.
Of
Anyway,
course. Yeah.
we be preemptive so that we can err on the side of being responsive, putting customer first, um, and so doing a more forethought.
Yeah. So it's again that starts to these are things that you set up at the outset of your strategy. You work out what you are prepared to do as a company,
Yep.
how you're using social in one aspect, what's the purpose of it. But if people do respond, I love that idea of having the kind of pre-prepared responses which you develop with compile. And presumably you can do that keep adding to that over time as you start to spot
Yeah.
trends and stuff going forward.
It's a living document because you're going to learn. Oh, because you might be running a campaign that wasn't part of your initial planning or the FAQ development, and so you may have to had a kind of an addendum to that FAQ for this campaign. Like, what are the rules and regs for the campaign? What's the landing page for the terms and conditions? Um, whatever is it? Is the call center ready for this, for the volume? So, and if they're not, oh, there's going to be some issues because customer service isn't ready for the spike in volume, and that's going to
Yeah.
potentially lead to some um, upset uh, customers.
Yeah. Yeah. If I come back again into my world and think about customer acquisition for investment companies for retail,
Hmm.
um, if a client wanted to think, okay, my job is to promote my financial investment product. I want to make people aware of it, and then I want to move them through the funnel. How would you start mapping out a social strategy from a content point of view? Is this stuff that you would sit with? I know that you have different team members with
Hmm.
your agency that are responsible. Is this something you have a view on?
So we work with them collaboratively to so what are your content pillars? We
Yeah.
also look at what content do you already have that could be repurposed? What indicators do you already have of some content that performed well? And I don't want to sound like, oh, so like we're taking the lazy path or the path of least resistance. Often organizations have a lot of content that has been underutilized. They wrote a blog,
Okay.
they posted it on the LinkedIn company page once, and they moved on. But oh, there's like 6 elements from that blog that could be turned into a carousel or an
Yeah.
animation, and so can I squeeze more juice out of the content lemon, and um, put them into formats that are more conducive to so TikTok, it's got to be a carousel or a video.
Yeah.
And I can't send someone to a link as easily on TikTok or Instagram as I can on LinkedIn or Facebook. So, can I bring forward some of the insights from the content so they can basically consume it where they're at on TikTok or Instagram um, or Threads or what have you, and just reduce that friction? And also, because a lot of the platforms don't like links, or they don't like it as much as native content. And so
Okay.
it basically just kind of this methodical checklist of what do you have already, in what form, what are your content pillars, do you have defined personas or an ICP? What has worked in the past versus now. Then it's looking at is it paid for awareness? Is it paid for conversion? And then if you're doing paid, you're raising attention, you're driving traffic. What's going to be in place already and what's planned to be in place to uh, continue to foster that community? Uh, you know, Content that provides the best answer.
Mm.
Being resources, education, and so on. But it doesn't hurt to infuse it with a bit of humor every now and again too. Now, memes, that's tough in financial services and compliance because by the time you explain a meme and get it like if you're going to do a variation on it and get it approved, sometimes that window has passed. So you
Yeah.
probably kind of steer away from stuff that's really trendy,
Yeah.
and you don't want to dilute it because that looks like you're trying too hard. But there's a way to to infuse things with humor and because when you ask someone like what was the last piece of content you engaged with or shared, it's usually something that caused an emotional response. And saying emotion in financial services may seem counterintuitive or an oxymoron, but like I said, there are life events that people are experiencing that have an emotional component that usually is tied to some sort of financial implication too.
I think it's amusing that people think about how can you bring emotion into financial services, where people get probably the most emotional about money as they do in anything in life. So I think it's a rich subject if you scratch a little further,
Oh,
shall we say?
yeah, it couldn't be more to the point. Your first job, first car, first house, first child, birth, death, divorce, marriage,
Yeah,
graduating from college, like whatever. These are all like life milestones, good, bad, or
yeah.
indifferent, and can cause some reflection. And you don't want to look predatory, but you're sitting across the table from someone, helping them make financial decisions. How do you build trust and rapport as a person and through content as an organization as well?
In the UK, a lot of brands now are exploring their first foray into social, but they many of them are starting to think actually a safer way for us to do this is through finfluencers. What's your view on this?
If you're going to tie your brand to an influencer of any kind, my first advice is make sure you do your due diligence. I'm not saying this happens with every influencer, but there's a lot of people who've risen in I spend a lot of time on TikTok, which I enjoy thoroughly. And not necessarily finfluencers, but just influencers in general. There are many influencers that rise and fall. And then
Okay.
inevitably there's a controversy that surfaces that poses a problem. Or in a sense, over time they revealed themselves. It may not
Mm,
have been, something you would have picked up earlier, but over time they make a misstep or whatever. And given how valuable a financial services brand is, I'm not saying don't use a finfluencer, but do so cautiously.
yeah.
And also, like, this is just a trend. And can you find a viable finfluencer? Yeah, probably you could probably find multiple. But
Mm,
it's figuring out the parameters in which you're going to engage them, and for what purpose. Is it to educate? Are you going to use them as the educator, like sharing their own personal, financial investor journey or whatever? Like, how are you going to use them? And what credibility do they have? And so, you know, can you use influencers? Yes. I would err on the side of using micro influencers that have a smaller audience, but that are more engaged. You can pay a ridiculous amount of money to Kim Kardashian, but just because she has millions of followers doesn't mean those are followers that do what she tells them to do or influences them to do. Many people follow them just for the drama and the controversy, versus a micro
yeah.
influencer is, more likely trying to deliver value to their following. But again, it still comes down to how are you going to collaborate, the rules of engagement, um, how much of their history can you vet, and also, like, how quickly can you decouple from them if they, over time, their truth
True
comes out,
colors
shall we
or
say? Yeah,
yeah,
their
yeah,
true colors.
yeah. So just thinking of the conversation and tying different parts together,
Mhm.
it sounds to me like it would almost be sensible to think of him in influence in terms of like a paid activation boost, but not at the expense of building out your own organic social strategy first and foremost. Would that be right?
So again, it goes back to it's like doing paid without organic. So
Mm,
you're having these flash in the pan moments, or you're leveraging an influencer over, a few days, or, an influencer, okay, for, X amount of dollars, I'll do two reels and one video, or like, or, oh, maybe you go so bold as that, oh, we'll let them do an Instagram takeover for a day.
yeah.
I don't know a bank or an insurance company that would like let go of a social channel
No,
to that
let's
extent. But
assume that.
yeah, you're not using a finfluencer every single day for every piece of content. So there has to
No.
be something more foundational in place. But even going back to my time at RBC, they had Olympians that were, sponsored. And so we didn't use them as finfluencers, but there was an audience that loved the Olympics. And we were in between the Winter Olympics and the Summer Olympics. So as the ramp up to the Summer Olympics, we were asking the Olympians, What are some of your superstitions? What's your favorite, meal competition? What rituals do you have? What's your cheat meal?
Mm.
Post-competition, like, what's the first thing you wanna do kind of thing. And so it wasn't had nothing to do with investments or my savings account or whatever, but it was engaging content. And sometimes, this goes back to, like, there's a reason big brands sponsor things outside of their industry. F1,
Yeah.
the Olympics, whatever, because they want the visibility. What can you do within those, um, channels for activations, just the halo effect, and it's a great sort of source of content, and you kind of earn the right if we use the old rule of 80-10-10, 80% of your content should be helpful, educational, and serve your audience. 10 is about you, then 10's promotional. So
Right. Yeah.
that gives you a lot of latitude for doing content that isn't even about an insurance policy or a savings account, but figuring out, um, what again with compliance, what are the guardrails that I have to stay within, and how free or innovative can I be within those guardrails?
Mm. Yeah, that's great. And I got a question which I reckon must be the most common question that you get asked all the time. So I'm
Hmm.
going to place a
Bring it on.
subtle apology before it. Um, how often does a firm need to post to be credible? You must get this all the time.
If you're posting once every other month, nobody's seeing you.
No.
And I'll use LinkedIn as an example. They've changed their algorithm yet again, and they're focused on relevancy, not recency. And so the broad, overarching, covers it all answer is post consistently,
Okay.
decent quality content, and you'll be fine. And what do I mean by consistently? Probably a minimum of 2 times a week. 3 to 5 is better. Some platforms will allow for multiple posts per day. LinkedIn, probably not more than once in a 24-hour period. Now, with a big enterprise, you've got different stakeholders. Oh, HR wants to do a job post. Then you've
Mm.
got, brand partnerships. Oh, they've got an activation of it. So there are people are competing for that one window per day kind of thing, and we face
Yeah.
that at the bank as well. So figuring that out too. But again, every platform uh, uh, has their kind of optimal uh, publishing volume or cadence. This is where it's so important to use your analytics. Look at what are the
Mm.
best days, what are the best times, experiment. Um, Sometimes there's a Monday, Wednesday, Thursday seem to be the better days on LinkedIn, or Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But there's a
Mm.
secondary spike sometimes on Sunday because people are at home
Right.
sitting on the couch. And like even when LinkedIn introduced their iPad app, the most high traffic time of the day was 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. And then they saw a secondary spike at 7 p.m. because people are at home after dinner, sitting on the couch, and they're like reading LinkedIn like a
Yeah.
magazine, but on their iPad. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
sometimes you're seeing the secondary spike on a Sunday. There was a time when I was publishing 10 to 20 times a day on Twitter because the shelf life of a tweet was 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And you're like, that's a lot. Not at the time it wasn't. And my engagement didn't go down. It went up, and I doubled
Mm.
not that followers are everything, but I doubled my following in a year, and then I kept going, and I doubled it again in 6 months. And
Right.
so, but it's not about the volume. It also had to do with the kind of content I was sharing, which was of high quality and helpful to I knew my audience, and I knew what they wanted because
Mm.
again, I paid attention to my analytics and saw what content was performing.
Yeah. Yeah. What I'm wondering about there, that's good to know. But what I'm wondering about, how does an organization go from a standing start and saying,
Hmm.
right, we want to put in place our social strategy.
Hmm.
Um, what team do they need in place? Do they need someone that is if there's multiple departments that are
Mhm.
working, is that something that they would build internally, or do they outsource all of that to an agency like yourself? How does
Well,
that work?
it comes down to, like, what resources do they have? So when I was at the bank, we were the enterprise social media team. And so we sat inside the enterprise branding communications. We had all the brand pillars, we were connected with or tied to. They didn't handle social, but they were stakeholders that we were, looking to get content about Olympics or the arts or hockey or whatever it might have been. But then there was an entirely different division called retail banking, the largest single division. Then there was insurance as well. And they were a different stakeholder group. What content did they want or need? And this is where you can kind of get in the weeds, because what it is, it's not so much about the strategy, it's about what does the organization look like and what sort of social media team structure should you have. If it's a big enterprise, should there be a steering committee? And if so, who needs a
Mhm.
seat at the table? And we often argue for social needs a seat at the table for the overarching marketing decisions. Social media is not the only marketing effort that should be occurring. I sometimes refer to it as the pointy end of we're the front of the spear. You've got email
Okay.
newsletters, you've got paid search, you've got just, content on the corporate website. There's a variety of things that are happening at any given time where you want to have a seat at the table so you can identify where and how social can complement, amplify, extend what's happening in the other realms, and also be sort of reciprocal, that social can lead to more people on your newsletter, can lead to more bookings on or registrations for webinars, or like attending, activation events,
Yeah.
or whatever it might be. And to more fundamental, did you conduct a content audit? What content does each line of business or division have that can be repurposed, reused, that is evergreen? In Canada, February is the registered retirement savings plan. It's the last month before tax season
Mm.
for you to make that investment that reduces your taxable income. Well, that happens every year. So every financial services company has content that they pull out of the
Yeah.
dryer, and now, yes, they refresh it and so on. So if you look at your calendar year, are there awareness months that we always do something about? Are there things that happen, like, towards tax season or whatever it is? What are the knowns in any given calendar year that are influence or guide us in our overall content planning, and start putting placeholders in a calendar in loose terms.
Mhm.
And then again, it's just kind of adding, it's like a layer cake. What's the foundation? What's campaign? What's time bound to a particular period of the year? Like I said, auditing. What do we already have? What do we want to create that's net new? Oh, we're gonna incorporate some finfluencers. Okay, like,
Mhm.
what's their angle? Do they serve one particular audience versus another? So in Canada, in June, it's Pride Month. So are there any
Mhm.
LGBTQ plus finfluencers that speak to that community? Whatever it is. So,
Yeah.
and gradually, like, basically, you're taking this jigsaw puzzle, and gradually the picture starts to form.
When a company or an individual is starting to put together their social media plan, then
Mhm.
invariably they're going to have to almost create a mini business plan for want of a better word, and say,
Mhm.
right, this is what we're hoping to achieve. When it starts to think about what's possible, what is this going to achieve, almost like the metrics for success, how do you advise people to kind of not overpromise and underdeliver, but what would your
Well,
advice be here?
the snarky response can be when people say, "Well, what's the ROI of social?" I'll say, "Well, let's put social aside for the moment. Talk to me about how you measure what you're doing now." And you can sort of see them. Because oftentimes, and I'm not trying to be snarky or a smart ass, it's just that sometimes reporting is a little shallow, a little thin, maybe absent.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm not trying to call them out. It's just like, and I'm not saying, oh, that we're not going to have accountability. Absolutely, we will. We report monthly and quarterly on what's happening. And
Mm.
we organize it into what I refer to as the 3 C's of ROI. The first C is community. Did we grow your community over time, which means extended reach, engagement, etc.? Did we improve your content and its performance in terms of like, did we improve the cadence, frequency, but also the quality of the content, and that results in hopefully higher engagement? And the third C is conversion. And that can run the gamut. That can be just increased referral traffic to your website from social. If we're writing blogs for you on a monthly basis, did we increase blog traffic? Is there a landing page for webinar registrations? Did we see a spike there if it was like tied to a campaign or an event? If it's offline and activations, is there a way where I can link the two? We did this in social, and this correlated to some action that occurred offline. Um, Downloading an ebook. Did we increase traffic to the tools or resource page, for calculators for mortgage or investment or whatever? And again, this is about being collaborative, figuring out what if kind of say, what are your business objectives for the next 6 to 12 months? And let's layer on social towards that to serve those objectives versus we're not here for the likes. That's secondary. I mean, is it a metric that's worth paying attention to? Yes. Is it the only metric? No.
Yeah.
Because a like is I n I can't tell you what a like is worth monetarily, but I can,
Yeah.
have a better idea if someone signs up for a webinar. Oh, well, that's someone I can, refer to an advisor in a branch or whatever it might be.
Yeah, yeah, excellent. So just to start wrapping this all in into one thing, if again the worlds that I move in, UK investing companies,
Mhm.
if they're listening to us and want to get started, what's the one thing that they ought to do this week?
Listen,
Yeah,
identify the kinds of things, you know, one of their advisors is at a networking event. Like, what do they what is a trigger in a conversation that says, I could help you? Or not that you're always on the pitch, but this idea, like, we should have a follow-up conversation. Or even more subtle or more helpful is, oh, that's interesting. Actually, I've got some material that I think you would enjoy reading. And
yeah,
you're leading with education. You're leading with being helpful. You're not going for the close. But there was something that individual said that triggered that. So to look at the where like identify where these conversations are happening, and to look for these social signals, and then what does that mean to kind of responses, directly or through your content, and then as well to do a content audit and identify what content we have that's still evergreen, could be repurposed, could be refreshed, or just, wasn't shared enough. That,
yeah,
again, what you shared last Tuesday on at 9 a.m. on LinkedIn, probably go out again this week at Thursday at 4 p.m. And it's
yeah,
not
yeah,
necessarily going to be seen by the same people. And but also not just I don't want to make this sound self-serving is what resources do you have? So often organizations call it like we're doing this off the corner of our desk. And so, I mean, social is sort of secondary. Oh, well, we're going to put all of our energy into paid search. Nothing wrong with that. But then, if you want social to complement it, it can't be just this afterthought. You want all of your marketing efforts to be working in a coordinated way, which is why you need the seat at the table. But one of the
yeah,
reasons we exist is we are additional bench strength to existing resources within an organization that may be resource constrained. We
yeah.
work with an HR benefits company, 4,000 employees. There's only 2 people in digital for the area that
Right.
we
Yeah.
support. And so they don't have the bandwidth, but they've got
No.
a whole bunch of things that's on their, part of their mandate. And so, we can assist. And again, that's not a commercial, but goes back to something more fundamental. What resources do you have in place? What's their skill set and where are their gaps? Because that goes back to the more fundamental thing is your overarching marketing plan. Are you properly resourced for your entire marketing effort, not just social?
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. Um, Thank you, Andrew. That's a really good overview of social and how we can start. And gives clients a route in to think about it. I'm going to come to this last question. I don't know how we're going to do this, and then we may,
Okay.
and we simply can't. This may
I'm
well be the
I'm
answer
game.
here.
I'm game.
We have a bookcase here, which I don't know if you can see or not,
Nope.
because of. But it's where our guests on the podcast leave a memento behind, so that future listeners to the podcast can think, "Oh, what's that?" and think, "I want to go and do that." Is there a memento or something you could send me virtually which sums up the conversation we've had today that
Oh,
springs to mind?
I can send you an ebook copy of my book that can go on the shelf.
Well,
Because
that'd be
it's not meant to be self-promotional, but it speaks to everything we talked about today. Because one of the reasons I wrote the book that I did 4 years ago was to address many of the issues we discussed. There's a lot of social media books out there that just talk about social media, but a lot of the things we touched on speak to the way things are happening inside an organization. What is it like to work with compliance, legal, HR, other stakeholders as you are trying to define and execute a marketing strategy.
fantastic. That would be great if you could send us that. And what we'll also do is we'll make sure that the image is on screen so that any listeners can go. But where can they buy that book should they want to?
They can buy it from Amazon or, given that you're in the UK, because my publisher is in the UK, from koganpage.com.
Fantastic, great publisher, very good. Andrew, thanks you so much for your time. That's I've really enjoyed our conversation today, and I look forward to future ones as well.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening today to The Growth Engine. If you enjoyed this episode and like to hear more, please do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from, and follow us on LinkedIn for regular updates or on hubagency.co.uk. Thank you, and see you next time.